And so that's what we talk about genotype. And so there's a couple of patterns here. What do you notice? And we're only going to focus on these 4. Remember, I said that the curly hair, the hair texture is something, but it's a little more complicated than what we're going to have time to allow for today. So what is a pattern that you notice between the genotype and the phenotype? Remember, I've got the words recessive, dominant here. What do you notice? What are some observations? What are some connections between the genotype and the phenotype and classified as? So like, look at recessive, right? Red hair and blue eyes are recessive traits. Look at what the genotype is, right? And then look at these dominant. You know, how many combinations of the genotypes can you have to get that expression? What do you think? Okay, good. Thank you, Colin. That's okay. I understand. Good. So the letter variable is the first letter of the word. Good. Okay. Colin said, I already read through the lesson, but no one else is responding. Recessive is lowercase, dominant is uppercase. Right. Good. So exactly. In order for a recessive trait, right, this is a new word, trait. In order for that recessive trait to show up, you need 2 recessive alleles. And we're going to talk about what alleles mean in a second. But yes, basically, you need to have 2 of the little guys. And just like Colin said, the big letter represents dominant and the little letter represents recessive. And so in order for you to have a recessive phenotype, so red hair, you need to have 2 little r's. And remember, these letters are just representations of the gene. And so sometimes you're going to have a gene that is dominant and sometimes you're going to have a gene that is recessive. And actually what we want to say is we want to call them alleles. And I told you that in a second. These are new vocab words. So if you remember from our chromatids, right? So we learned about this in meiosis. So if you remember in chromatids, we talked about how you're going to get one from mom, or this one is from dad and this one is from mom. And so when we say one from mom and one from dad, we're talking about these alleles. And alleles are traits. They're the variation. So that's like you have a gene for hair, but you can have brown hair. You can have red hair. You can have blonde hair. And those different colors are called variations, which we call alleles. And so depending on whether that allele is dominant or recessive is going to determine what you see. And so with these recessive traits, you're going to have 2 recessive alleles. And if you have a dominant trait, you can have either or of these combinations. As long as you have one dominant allele, that's what's going to show up on your features. And so we use specific terms to classify these. So here's new vocabulary. There's going to be a lot of new vocab. I'm going to do my best to show and teach it along the way. But we have this term called homozygous recessive. So you know I'm a fan of breaking down words into prefixes and suffixes because it's the easiest way to remember something. So we have this word homozygous recessive, and we also have the word homozygous dominant. And that's what we use to classify, you know, whether or not these are 2 of the same. And so we use this prefix homo. And I'm sure the first thing that comes up in mind is the term homosexual. And the reason we say homosexual is because this prefix homo means the same, right? Homosexual, someone who likes the same sex. Homozygous means that you've got 2 of the same letters. And so how you differentiate between the 2 is homozygous recessive, meaning it's going to be 2 recessive alleles, and we use the smaller case letters to represent that, right? Or homozygous dominant, which is when you're going to see 2 big letters or 2 dominant alleles, right? And then we need to use recessive and dominant to describe what it's the same as. But then you can also have something called heterozygous. And hetero just like heterosexual means two different. And so heterozygous is when you have two different alleles or two different letters, right? So you've got a big case, lowercase, you've got a dominant and a lower. And if you have a dominant, if you have in one uppercase, that means that's going to be what's expressed, right? So in order for you to have a cleft chin, you could have either one of these or these, but you really don't know until you have your offspring. So all this time, right, remember, let's connect this back to meiosis. We learned about in prophase 1, there's this thing called crossing over. And so when you have that crossing over, you swap some information. A lot of you guys talked about how Luke, right, if we go back up to this slide, you talked about how Luke has his dad's chin and his dad's nose. Well, fun fact, right? And I, as a matter of fact, also have the nose and the chin. Fun fact, the chin is from my dad's side of the family, and the nose is from my mom's side of the family. So the reason that Luke can now have my mom's nose and my dad's nose, so Luke's grandfather's chin and Luke's grandmother's nose, is because of that recombinant, right? So because of that crossing over. So remember that when we talked about meiosis, we know that the ending result is going to be these gamete cells, so half of one and half of the other, and then they're going to mix, and you're going to get this fertilization, and you're going to have these genes. And that's how meiosis connects to our genes, right? You get one from mom and one from dad. Specifically, this crossing over gives us that genetic variation. So we're going to practice Punnett squares really quickly, and this is going to be a very straightforward, run-of-the-mill. This is just in preparation for when we start working with Luke's. And so on your worksheets, you should also have a spot for this. So let me just find where that is. So we've crossed all of this. You guys should have been typing in homozygous recessive, homozygous a dominant, and then heterozygous right here. And so now we are right here. Okay, so this is where you should be practicing. And so I am going to ask for you guys to be sharing because I don't want to be doing too much of the talking. But we are going to go ahead and practice our very first Punnett square. And so one thing that we know is we're going to get one from mom and one from dad. And so how we do that is we take the genotype, right? So if we take one parent, we're going to say the mom is on the top and the dad is going to be on the side. And so first of all, tell me in the chat, what is the phenotype of both parents? What colored hair is both parents going to have? Brown, right, exactly. Good, you guys. Awesome. You guys are getting the hang of it. So remember though, these are the genotypes. And remember in meiosis, you only get half of mom and half of dad. So that means that one of those alleles are going to be going. And when we talk about Punnett squares, the whole thing about Punnett squares is only to tell you what the possibilities are for your offspring to inherit those traits and what the percentages are. So what are the possibilities and what are the percentages of that happening? It's not to guarantee you anything, right? I mean, look what happened with my nephew. So what we're going to do is we need to take one from mom and one from dad. So in this box, it's kind of like Battleship. Oh no, I gave away some information. But yeah, so let's go back here. So remember, I talked about alleles. One specific allele, so each one of these letters is the allele. If we go back to this image, that's where this is one allele, this is another allele. The two together is a gene, which is exactly what I show here. So these two together are the gene, and each one is going to be separate is an allele, right? So one gene. Good, I love it. You guys are already starting to figure it out, a 3-to-1 ratio for brown to blonde. So Emmett, will you, could you please take yourself off of, Emmett, can you take yourself off of your microphone or oh my gosh, I can't talk. Take yourself off of mute and explain to what you did. I'm going to exit out here so I can be typing in here and type it in as you go. Can you explain what you did, Emmett?
Okay. Well, so we just move over the bees into the column. I have no better verb. So the first square, we combine the first two, which are capital B's for brown. So that would be homozygous dominant brown.
Good.
And we move over to the right. We combine capital B with lowercase b, and that would be heterozygous, but still dominant.
Good.
And the same below in the, I guess, third square would be capital B, lowercase b, heterozygous.
Good.
And in the last square, we combine lowercase b with lowercase b to be homozygous recessive, and that would be blonde. So
Good.
3 chances of it being brown hair to 1 chance of it being blonde.
Okay, that is, oh my gosh, great job, Emmett. That was so well said. I'm going to color code just so we could all see this. So let's color code mom's genes to be, I don't want to go gender norms. So let's do blue for female. I love mixing it up. I don't like staying the status quo. And let's do green. Why isn't it letting me? I know why. Okay, we're just going to stick with black for guys because I decided to make it blue because I wanted to make it blue. How about that? I like my reasoning. I feel like that was a very sound reasoning. But yes, so what I'm trying to do here is show you where Emmett was getting these letters. And so remember, we need to get all of the possible combinations. So when we talked about at the end of meiosis, you're going to have 4 genetically different haploid cells. And that is what we're talking about here. These are the combinations. These are going to be the combinations between the male and the female, like sperm when it meets the egg. They're going to have different genes, right? And so this is where we're getting those letters from. And just like Emmett said, the phenotypes, the only possible variations are going to be brown. Why is this not typing? There we go. Going to be brown or blonde. And if we go ahead and type out the possibilities, right, if we take a look at our 4 options, 3 of the 4 are going to be brown hair for phenotypes, which in other words is 75%. And for blonde hair, there's only 1 possible combination that's going to result in blonde, which makes it 1 out of 4 or 25%. Does that make sense? So these are the phenotypes. So that's what's going to be expressed. Now, Emmett was also talking about this idea of heterozygous and homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive. So that's what we talk about the genotypes, right? We know that there are going to be multiple combinations of genes that can result in similar phenotypes. And so we have big B, and then we have big B, and we have little b. Those are the 3 possible combinations we have in our Punnett square. So what are the possibilities, right? What are the chances that the offspring is going to be heterozygous dominant? Well, we have 4 possible combinations. Of the 4 possible combinations, only 1 of them is going to result in a heterozygous or homozygous dominant, which in other words is 25%. Then we have a 50% chance, right? Because of the 4 combinations, we have 2 that are big B, little b. So that means that we have 2 out of 4 chance, which is going to be 50%. And then for little b, that is over here, there's only 1/4, which makes sense, right? Which is going to be 25%. And so that's really what we're going to be doing when we work with Punnett squares. Are there any questions before we move on? Because we're about to get into even more. So do we have any questions so far? The assignments are going to be posted on your homepage on the biology. I don't have those exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's going to probably be around 4.8 and 4.9. Okay, no problem, Ava. Thank you for letting me know. Right. Okay, well, let me know when you're ready and I'll move on to the next slide. All right, Eva, I'm going to go on if that's all right. And I can always go back and at the end of the meeting. Okay. So again, alleles and the total. And so each one of these guys is an allele, and then we have a gene. And remember, the letters are just representing that gene. But here we have the pedigree. So you guys have also will be or have already learned about a pedigree. And the cool thing about a pedigree is it really shows you the family tree. It's basically a family tree. But this is how we figure out what genetics, right? We use this as a tool to take a look at those genes that are passed on. Oftentimes these are looked at for diseases, and there's different ways that they code it. And as you go through the unit, they're going to talk about that. So again, I'm just going to streamline how to read it. So we've got Luke here at the center of our diagram. And his parents are Mike and Christina, and they are shown to be connected through this direct line. And that means that they are married, right? And then in the middle of that line means that they have an offspring named Luke, right? And then if you use that to branch off, here's my brother, and then I'm right here, here I am. And so this means that I'm his sister, right? And then my parents are Alan and Lucci. And so these are my parents, right? And then if you go over to Christina's side, she has a sister named Carly. And it's hilarious because you can actually see how similar they are, but different. And then they have their parents, Karen and Rick. So let's go ahead and really quickly, I'm going to ask you, what is the relationship between Carly and Luke? What is the relationship between Carly and Luke? Mm-hmm. Good. Yes, Luke is Carly's nephew. What is the relationship between me and Christina? Good. Exactly. Sister-in-law. Good. So you guys are getting the hang of it. And of course, it gets really confusing when you start adding in cousins, and then you've got twice removed and once removed and all that fun stuff. Double, second cousins. So in a pedigree, we often use symbols. So I put in pictures just because we're talking about genes, but in a pedigree, you won't always have pictures. Instead, you're going to have symbols to denote who's male and who's female. And so a square symbolizes a male. Okay, so that's my dad, right? All of the men in the family have squares. And then all the circles symbolize females. And so that's one of the things that we use to determine, if a gene or if a disease is what we call sex linked. And that's something that you're going to get into. But that is one way that we use these squares and these circles to determine and to differentiate between the two sexes. And so with time, we also have new symbols to be inclusive and represent everyone. And so sometimes you're going to have a symbol like this, and that means that they are trans male. In this case, whatever is in the center means that's what they were born with. And then on the outside is what is the gender they identify with. So this would be trans male, meaning they were born female, but they identify as male. And then trans female, which is the same, where you've got the box in the middle, which means that they were born male, but they identify as female. So the one on the outside is what they identify with, and that is what their pronouns would match, or whatever their pronouns they identify with. And you also have this symbol that's a diamond for people who are non-binary, so whether or not they identify as neither male or female. So these are all symbols that are used now, especially in the medical field and with geneticists that are trying to, acknowledge that there is there are people in their population as well, right? So making sure that we're being inclusive completely. And so we've got this pedigree, and that's what we're going to do to understand and read it and understand how there's family connections and how genes can be given down. So we're going to practice how to figure out the genotypes of Michael and Christina, right? The very first thing you guys noticed in the very first picture is that Luke has red hair, but both parents have brown hair. So how is it possible that Luke has these genes? So we're going to fill out these boxes, and I believe you guys have this on your worksheet. Let's double check before we go on, right? And so you should have been following along, right? Following along with the different, what these symbols represent. And then we're right here, okay? So this is where we are. So the phenotype is what is expressed. We're going to identify if it's dominant or recessive, and now we're going to find out the possible genotypes for it. So that's where we are right now in the worksheet. So let's go back to our presentation. So remember, what is Luke's hair? Oh, goodness, I have to keep forgetting I can't type in it. So Luke's hair is red. And what was it? Was red recessive or dominant? Go ahead and type that in the chat. Recessive. Good. So then if his hair is recessive, what is the only genotype he can have in order to have red hair? RR. Good job, Emmett. Exactly. So remember, when you have recessive, you need to have two little alleles, two recessive alleles. His eyes are blue. What was that? Was that recessive or dominant? Good. Good, Reagan. Exactly. It is recessive. So what must his eyes be? And we are going to use the letters B for this just to, make sure we're not getting confused. But Ava, you are correct. Remember, letters are just representations of the allele. So Ava, you put in RR, but I'm going to go ahead and assume you meant little b, right? So little b is going to be what we use for blue eyes. Now, we are going to say that his lips are full, right? He has full lips. And we said that full lips were dominant or recessive. Yes, they are dominant. So if they're dominant, what are the possible genotypes that Luke can have? Remember, there's two genotypes. Good, Emmett. We're going to get to the chin in just a moment. I may have put it out of order on the worksheet, and I apologize if I did that. But Emmett, you are correct. So it either is going to be DD or big D, or big D, little d, right? We are not exactly sure. And then in the same thing for the chin, he has a cleft chin, which is going to be dominant or recessive. Dominant. Good, which means his genotypes can be which or the other. Well, we're actually not doing hair. Remember, I told you that we were going to do not the hair texture because it's just a little bit more complicated. But yes, and then we're using the letter C for chin just to differentiate the letters so we can, that's okay, Emmett, no big deal. We're just going to use the different letters. But yes, these are all the possibilities. So let's start with my brother and Christina. So in order for him, okay, and this is in your worksheet, if you take a look at this spot right here. So this is what you should have been filling out. And I did say hair type. We're just going to ignore that. I apologize. I put that in there and I forgot I changed my mind and I didn't make the appropriate adjustments. So just ignore that. But now we're going to be right here. And so there's these blank Punnett squares, and we're going to kind of work backwards. So for example, we're going to start right here. And we know that in order for Luke to have red hair, he needs to have the genotype little r, little r. So I'm going to put it in that bottom box just because it's just easier. And so we're going to work inside out. So let me, this and then fit. There we go. Perfect. This is what I wanted. So we're going to have little r in this box. So if that means that that is his red hair, what does that mean? What must Christina and Michael have in order for Luke to have red hair in their genotypes? What must Christina have? A recessive red, exactly. So that means that Christina must have one R. Good. So what does that mean for Michael? What must that mean my brother has? What allele must my brother have? Good, you guys. Good, little r. Good. But they both have brown hair. So what other allele must Christina have in order for brown hair to be expressed? Good, Ella. Exactly. And remember, these letters we keep the same because they represent the gene, and then the upper and lowercase represent the variation of that gene. So that's why we're not having B and R, because that would represent two different genes. So yes, Christina must have a big R in order to have brown hair, and Michael must also have a big R. And Emmett, I love that you're using vocabulary words. Yes, they are both heterozygous, right? So exactly. So these must be the genotypes for Michael and Christina. So if we go into our PowerPoint here, I can go ahead. The phenotype for my brother is that he has brown hair. Christina has brown hair. And that means that Michael's genotype for brown hair must be big R, little r, and same thing with Christina. Big R, I put it in the wrong spot. Big R, little r. And there isn't necessarily a place for you to be writing these boxes. That's kind of what we're going to leave those Punnett squares to be, is that in lieu of that, right? Okay, so let's go ahead. And so now we're starting to work backwards, right? And we're starting to work in a way that is going to give us opportunity to understand how we can use these pedigrees. So let's go ahead and do blue eyes, right? And so if we go back to our worksheet, we've got blue eyes, right? So again, I always put it in this little box just because whenever it's recessive, those usually means that that's where it's going to be. We usually put the big letter front in the front and then followed by the little letter, but it really doesn't matter which way you put it. But this is just what looks better to the eye. So if he has blue eyes, he must have recessive. So already you guys can start to see a pattern. What do you think, right? What do you think the genotype for Michael and Christina are going to be for their eye color? Okay, so I see a big B from Ava. Can you be a little bit more specific? And a little B from Bella. Will you guys be a little bit more specific about that? So like, is it does, tell me by Christina what their genotype is going to be, and Michael is, or Mike. So weird to call him Mike, but good, Tara. So that is going to be big B, little b, same thing with both of them, right? So, oopsies, that should be little b. Good. So that is going to be their genotype. Exactly. So we're starting to get the hang of it. So even though they do have brown eyes, but that must mean that they have a small b in order for them to have a son with blue eyes, right? Good. And then lips. So this is where it gets a little tricky because we really don't know. But if we take a look at Christina and Michael, they both have, and I'm going to just tell you because they it's a little tricky, but they both have full lips. Okay. And Michael has a cleft chin, Christina has a round chin. So let's go back to our squares on our worksheets. So why don't you guys go ahead and work on, well, let's do this one together. I lied because it's difficult. So the thing is, we don't know whether or not Luke has two dominant or like they're like homozygous dominant, or if he's heterozygous. So we're going to fill that in for both. And so he is either going to have big L, or he is going to have big L, little l. And I do cursive just to make it stand out better. And then if he had thin lips, then he would need to have two L's. So if we're trying to work backwards, there is a possibility that Christina, no problem, Reagan, thanks for joining us. There is a possibility that Christina and Michael, either one of them is going to have one or the other, right? But we know that there is the 75% chance that he was going to be getting it. So in our boxes, we can be putting in big B and then a big B, or oh my gosh, not B, L. A big L. And then we could have a big L or a small L. The same thing with Michael. We really just don't know. We really just are not sure about their dominant traits, and we're not going to know until Luke has his offspring, right? Because then that's when we're starting to see how those homozygous recessive ones are going on. You should be doing about, according to the pacing guide, Owen, you should be doing about 2 to 3 biology assignments a day, unless you're behind, in which case you should be doing more. Okay, so these are the possible combinations. We're just not sure yet because the dominant could show up with a recessive. And so we'll find out exactly what they're going to possibly have when they have their second child, or depending on what their second child is going to look like. So their full lips could either be big L, little l, or big L, right? Same thing over here. Big L, little l, or big L, Now, I'm going to have you guys work on the chin, however, okay? So there's a couple of things that I want to point out, and we are running out of time, so I do understand if you have to go. I clearly had a couple of more things. You know what? Let's actually skip this and go down to the next one, and we can come back to this, because as long as we can get to one more Punnett square, then we can talk about, you can get practice on your own, but let's at least do one of the Punnett squares alone, or excuse me. But as you can see, you can start to work backwards. And so taking into consideration, right, we know that Christina has a round chin. Okay, so that's something that we saw in the PowerPoints. We know that she has a round chin. She does not have a cleft chin. And as we said, a cleft chin is dominant. So what must Christina's genotype be in order to have a round chin? And remember, we're using the letter C to represent this gene. So what must be Christina's? Okay, so good, Ava, but remember it's recessive to have a round chin. The cleft chin is dominant. So good, we know that she must have a little c. And so if we know she has little c, and we go back to our Punnett square, we know that Christina's genotype has to be little c. Now, Michael has a cleft chin. Luke has a cleft chin. So what must be Michael's, okay, actually, let me figure out how to reword this. So we know that there is going to be at least one little c in each of these boxes, because that's the only genotype that can be given. So what could the possibility of Mike's genes be? Good. So he could be having a big C or a big C or a little c.
I didn't understand that.
Actually, it is that possible. If Michael had a little c, no, it is possible. Never mind. There is that chance. So then we can put this in here, right? And so we can start to fill out this guide, and we can start to see that there is a 25% chance that Luke could have had a round chin. But we know for sure that Christina has a little c, and that Michael is a possibility of having these two. Okay. So now we know what genotypes, right? We know the genotypes of them both. So we have, let's take a look at Michael and Christina's genotype. So we know that it's big R, little r for both of them. They're both heterozygous. So let's go ahead and type that into our squares. So we're going to have Christina on the top and Michael on the side. And we're trying to find what the possibilities are. So go ahead and on your own, fill out the Punnett square. Remember that we want one from mom and one from dad. Wait, I clicked the wrong thing, didn't I? Right? And so let's go ahead and tell me what the combinations are. So, right, we're going to have one from mom. We're going to have one from dad. Remember, we're going to have one from dad. And then we're going to have one from mom. One from dad, or one from mom. One from dad. And one from mom. And one from dad. So there we have our Punnett square. So what were the phenotype possibilities? What were the options that we have for the phenotype? What were the options for it to be expressed? Meaning, what were there? What could possibly have Luke? What color hair could Luke have gotten, according to our table? Do 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 do. Anyone? Well, let's start off with this. What color does Luke have? Good, Emmett. That's exactly what I was talking about. Good. So we know that the options are, let's take that underline. And so we know what the options are: brown and red. And so if we have brown and red, just like you said, 3 to 1, right, Emmett? So that means that 3/4 of the chance were to have brown hair, or 75% chance of having brown hair, and 1/4 or a 25% chance of having red hair. Good. What were the possible genotypes here? Okay, so what, good, Emmett, you're on top of it. We know that the possible genotypes are R, big R, big R, big R, little r, and little r, little r. I don't know. And so what were those probabilities, right? Out of how many, there's 4 combinations, and we always like to keep it simple just because 4 is the easiest, right? So out of how many 4 combinations is there going to be a big R, big R? Good, Bella. Yes, 1/4 or a 25% chance. What about big R, little r? 2/4, good, you guys. You guys are getting the hang of it. 2/4 or 50%. And what were the chances of little r, little, oh man, autocorrect. What are exactly, Bella? Good. 1/4 or 25%. Good. And so the question is asking, what were the chances of Luke having red hair? And so we can highlight this because this is what our chances were. The chances were 25% or 1/4. Now we're going to do one more together, and I'm going to want you guys to do this. And so I know we're over time a little bit, but if you have to go, I understand. But if you want to stick around, I'm going to finish this out, and then we're going to do a little bit extra. Where what were the chances and what were the possibilities of Luke having red hair and blue eyes. So if you want to stick around, that's what I'm going to be working on, and then you can practice the rest of them, okay? But for blue eyes, so if we go back to our table, what are the phenotypes, or excuse me, the genotypes for my brother and my sister-in-law, right? It's big B, little b, and big B, little b. So if we go back to our square, we're going to have big B, little b, big B, little b. So go ahead and try doing the Punnett square on your own, and then fill out the phenotype and genotype when you're done, and share them in the chat what ratios you got. Okay, so I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then make sure you're using the letters B to indicate that we're talking about the eye color genes. Okay.
I have a question about the labs from yesterday.
Sure.
So there was 2 of them, and they're both due yesterday, but I didn't know how to complete them. And for part of it, they used special characters, and my computer can't load or print those, so I couldn't read part of it. And some of it just didn't really make sense to me. So could you help me with that?
Absolutely. So why don't you come to my help session today? Today's Tuesday, so I have a help session after lunch. So why don't you come at 12:30, and I can kind of figure that out with you and go over any of those questions. That work?
Yeah, that works. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so what did we get as an answer? Did anyone have a chance to finish up this this Punnett square? What was the phenotype? What were our options? So what possible eye colors could Luke have had? Okay, so the majority is big B, so I'm guessing that you mean brown. And what's the other, oopsies, what's the other color eyes he could have gotten? Blue. Good. And what were the chances of him having brown eyes? 3/4. Good. The 3/4 or 75%. And what were the chances of him having blue eyes? 1 out of 4 or 25%. Great. So what were the possible genotypes? What were all the possible genotypes that Luke could have gotten? Big B, little b. Good. Big B, little b, and little b, little b. And what were the chances of big B, big B? Good, 1/4 or 25%. And this is not always going to be the case. Okay, I do. And then what about big B, little b? I do want to point out that we have been using heterozygous, but that's not always going to be the case. It's not always going to turn out this evenly. And I just want to bring your attention to that because it's going to be Thank you, Emmett. You're anticipating my questions. It's just in this case, that's what their genotypes is. And so what were the chances? Yes, exactly, Emmett, like in Chin. And then you might have to make 2 Punnett squares to see what the chances are of him having either one. No, maybe. So you don't know exactly what the genotypes of his parents are, right? So you might have to make 2 different Punnett squares with the idea of trying each one. But for right now, we know that there was a 25% chance for him to have blue eyes. So let's go ahead and skip down to this page right here. Oh no, what happened? Let's go to this page right here. And so if you have to double click on this to type. So go ahead and double click. But if you're trying to find the possibilities of 2 things, then you need to multiply the decimals together, okay? So what is the percent possibility that Luke has red hair? What was that percent possibility? 25%. Good. What was the percent possibility that he had blue eyes? 25%. So when we're trying to multiply these, now this is really important, okay? Because when you're trying to multiply percentages, you have to put them back in their decimal form. So what's the decimal of 25%? So it's not just 25 because 25.25, right? We need to make sure that we include that decimal. Exactly. So it's going to be 0.25 for both. And then when you put it into your calculator, it's really important that you are also putting in the decimal. So now we're going to find out what the possibility was for him to have red hair and blue eyes. So go ahead, put that in your calculator, whether you do it on your phone, whether you do it in Google, whether you ask Siri, whatever it is that whatever method, go ahead and find out. But don't forget to put in those decimals because those decimals are what makes it a more accurate representation. So what were the chances that Luke was going to have red hair and blue eyes? Good, Emmett. It is 0.0625. And then if we want to change that into a decimal, right? What were the chances of him having, what were the percentage? So how do we change this back to a decimal? We have to move the decimal point over 2. Good, exactly. We move it over 2 spots. And so we can remove these zeros because we know the zeros in front of the number doesn't really do much. So it's 6.25 exactly, Emmett, times 100. 6.25%. That is the percent chance that we would have had a blue-eyed, red-haired nephew. And that is pretty extraordinary because that's not very likely. But that's what we're going to be doing today. And so if you guys would like, remember, you might have to do 2 Punnett squares for the cleft chin because we're not 100% sure what that genotype is for Michael. And then with Christina, we know what her genotype is. And then the same thing here. We're not entirely sure if Christina is going to have heterozygous or homozygous dominant, both for Christina and Michael. So you might have to make 2 Punnett squares, and then you can go ahead and find out the possibility of Luke having full lips and a cleft chin. Now, the last thing I wanted to say is if you decide, if you're having fun with this, because then I know I have fun with it, if you guys want, you can start to do a challenge where you break down the genotypes for the rest of the family. So, thinking about that with Michael, so I always thought that, my dad has a little bit of, his hair's gray in this picture, but he had a little bit of blonde hair, right? So in order for Michael to be able to give Luke red hair, what gene must he have gotten and from what parent, right? And then what does that mean for me? I have no idea. I always thought that I had, big B with for brown hair because I have brown hair. And then apparently I could be heterozygous. And I might have the red hair gene, like who knows, right? And so making sure, and so if you want to do that challenge, I really encourage you to. And if you do it, share your results with me, because I talked with my in-laws or my brother's in-laws, and I told them I was doing this, and they're all very interested to see what the results are. And then if you take a look at your worksheet, I did, or no, I'm sorry, in the PowerPoint, and I'll post the PowerPoint, I did break it up to focus on one side of the family at a time. All right. But that's what I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys had some fun. If you want, I am like kind of obsessed. I'm going to play a couple of videos of Luke because he is just the cutest and you can hang around and see him. Otherwise, that was your lesson for today. Next week, we are going to be working with the possibilities of my niece, because my in-law, my sister-in-law is pregnant with a girl, and we're going to find out what the possibilities are for my niece to have blonde hair, brown eyes, blue eyes, and all of that. So go ahead. Thank you guys for joining me. I'm just going to play some of these videos of Luke if you want to hang around and take a look. And I forget you guys can't hear them, but there's a couple that are really cute that you don't need sound. Let's see. Let's see this one. This is his, he just got, bye guys. He got his Bears jersey. And this is his touchdown dance. He's so cute. I can watch videos for hours. You guys don't have to bear with me. He's so cute. What's more? This is when he first, I know Emily, isn't he so cute? I just can't stop. I can't stop. Oh my God, there's just so many. I'm going to show you that video next week. Oh, I can't stop, you guys. I could watch videos of him all day. Oh, this is when he first found out. I can't stop. Oh, just drops it and leaves it. So typical. And then this was his first time in the water. Bye on it. Oh my God, I just. Oh, he's so cute. Bye, Avery. Bye, Denny. Okay, I'll stop now. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys have a wonderful Tuesday. And I will talk to you later. And if you guys have any questions about anything, I'm happy to stay on to answer anything.